A fist slammed through the thin wall of a trailer so hard the whole frame rocked sideways on its cinder blocks. A woman hit the floor. Pregnant. 8 months at least. Her knees cracked against bare plywood, and her palms slid through something wet and black that had been growing in the carpet for years. She didn't scream. She pushed herself up. The man standing over her filled the doorway. Thick neck. Crew cut. Hands like cinder blocks. He grabbed her collar and pulled her upright like she weighed nothing. But she looked straight at him. Didn't blink. Didn't beg. And something about that look made him let go. Not because he felt sorry for her. Because he realized she wasn't afraid of him. And that confused him long enough for her to take one step back. Now here's the thing. That woman had buried her husband 17 days earlier. She had $5 left. 5. And the trailer she was standing in, the one with mold on the walls and holes in the floor, she'd bought it that morning while the whole town laughed at her. What she pulled out from under those floorboards would silence every single one of them. Stay with me on this one. Her name was Lena Hart, 26 years old. Widow, 8 months pregnant. Flat broke. She'd driven into Harlan, Nevada, in a rusted-out Ford pickup that burned a quart of oil every 200 miles. The radiator had a crack she'd been patching with epoxy and prayer. The back seat held everything she still owned, which fit in 2 garbage bags and a shoebox. One bag was clothes. One was blankets. The shoebox held documents. A marriage certificate. A death certificate. An insurance claim that had been denied. And a single photograph of her husband, Marcus Hart, taken 3 months before he died on a construction site outside Reno. Marcus had been a framer, good with his hands, quiet, the kind of man who showed up early and left late and never complained about either. He worked for Kinney Development, the biggest construction outfit in the region. They had contracts all over northern Nevada. State buildings, county buildings, schools. The money was steady and the work was honest, or at least that's what Marcus believed until about 6 weeks before he died. That's when things changed. Lena noticed it first in his sleep. He started waking up at 3 in the morning, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. She'd ask him what was wrong and he'd say nothing. Then one night he told her. He said he'd found paperwork on the job site that didn't make sense. Invoices for materials that never showed up. Payments routed to companies he'd never heard of. Safety inspection reports signed and dated before the inspections had actually happened. He told his foreman, a man named Garrett Boone. Boone told him to forget about it. Told him to go home, kiss his wife, keep his mouth shut. Marcus didn't keep his mouth shut. He went back to the site office the next morning to photograph the files. By noon, a scaffold on the 4th floor collapsed. Marcus fell 32 feet onto a concrete slab. He was dead before the ambulance arrived. The official report said structural failure. Faulty bolts. A tragic workplace accident. Case closed in 9 days. Lena didn't believe it. She went to the Reno police. She sat in a plastic chair for 4 hours waiting to talk to a detective. When one finally sat down with her, he took notes, nodded in the right places, and told her the investigation was closed. She asked about the paperwork Marcus had mentioned. The detective said no paperwork was recovered from the site. Nothing suspicious at all. He was polite about it. That made it worse. Lena left that office knowing 2 things with absolute certainty. First, somebody had killed her husband. Second, nobody with a badge was going to help her prove it. Marcus's employer offered a settlement. $1,200. All she had to do was sign a waiver releasing Kinney Development from any future claims. She didn't sign. Her lawyer, a legal aid attorney who was handling 40 cases at once, told her she was making a mistake. He said $1,200 was better than nothing, and nothing was what she'd get if she tried to fight it. She didn't sign, and that decision cost her everything she had left. The landlord gave her 30 days, then 20. Then he changed the locks while she was at a doctor's appointment. She came home to find her bags on the sidewalk. She loaded the truck and drove east. Not toward anything. Away from everything. Gas was cheaper in the desert. Space was free. And she had nowhere else to go. Harlan, Nevada, was the kind of town that existed mostly out of stubbornness. For 100 people. a gas station, a feed store, a diner called Patty's with a cracked neon sign and a screen door that banged shut behind every customer. A courthouse that doubled as the town hall and the election office and whatever else the county needed it to be that week. People didn't move to Harlan. They were born there or they ended up there, and either way they spent most of their time trying to leave. So when a pregnant woman with out-of-state plates pulled up to the county auction on a Saturday morning, people noticed. The auction happened once a month on the courthouse steps. The county sold off seized property, tax-defaulted lots, abandoned vehicles, and whatever else had been sitting unclaimed long enough to become a legal headache. Most of it was junk. That month, the last item on the list was a trailer. A single wide, sitting on a dirt lot at the eastern edge of town. It had been abandoned 6 years earlier by a man who left in the middle of the night and never came back. Nobody knew why. Nobody cared enough to find out. The county wanted it gone. The auctioneer opened at $50. Nobody raised a hand. He dropped to 20. Nothing. Lena raised her hand at 5. A few people laughed. One woman sitting in a lawn chair near the back said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Honey, that's not a home. That's a coffin on wheels." More laughter. Lena paid her $5, took the deed, and drove to the lot that afternoon. The trailer was worse than she'd imagined. And she hadn't imagined much. The front door hung from a single hinge, swinging open in the wind like a jaw that wouldn't stay shut. The windows on the south side were shattered clean through, and something had been living inside. Raccoons, maybe, or cats. The carpet was black in patches, soaked through with mold that had been growing undisturbed for 6 years. It squelched under her shoes. The kitchen faucet was rusted completely shut. The bathroom ceiling had partially caved in, exposing pink insulation that hung down in wet clumps like dead skin. The whole place smelled like a mix of gasoline, wet animal, and something sweet and rotten underneath it all. Lena stood in the center of the trailer, put both hands on her belly, and breathed. She had $11 in her checking account. No credit cards. No family she could call who would answer. No friends within 500 miles. This trailer was it. This was the entire plan. She started that afternoon. She pulled the carpet out with her bare hands, section by section, rolling it into heavy, stinking tubes and dragging them out the door and across the dirt to the edge of the lot. Took her 3 hours. Her back screamed. Her hands were raw. But when she was done, the plywood subfloor underneath was dry in most places. Stained, but dry. She taped plastic sheeting over the broken windows using duct tape from the truck. She found a water spigot on the outside of the trailer, tested it, and got a thin stream of brown water that eventually ran clear. She rigged a garden hose to the kitchen sink with a coupling she found in the truck bed and more duct tape. It leaked at the joint. She wrapped it tighter. It held. That first night, she lay on a sleeping bag on the bare plywood floor and stared at the ceiling and listened to the wind push against the plastic over the windows. The trailer creaked and groaned like a ship. Every few minutes something would pop or settle and she'd hold her breath. But she slept. Not well, but she slept. The town watched her the way small towns watch anything unusual. Slowly, from a distance, through windshields, people drove past the lot and slowed down, looked, and kept going. Patty's diner, she became a topic. The pregnant woman, the junk trailer. Where'd she come from? What's she thinking? Someone said she was probably running from something. Someone else said she was probably on drugs. Patty herself said to leave the girl alone. But even Patty watched from behind the counter when Lena walked in on the third day to fill a water jug. Nobody offered help. Nobody introduced themselves. Harlan was watching, but Harlan wasn't welcoming. On the fourth night, something happened that changed everything. Lena was lying on the sleeping bag, half asleep, when she heard a sound. Not the wind. Not the trailer settling. A knock. 3 soft knocks. Coming from below. From under the floor. She sat up, held her breath, listened. Silence. She told herself it was an animal. Possum under the trailer. Something nesting. She lay back down. Then it came again. 3 knocks. Same spot. Same rhythm. Same interval. She pressed her palm flat against the plywood. It was cold and slightly damp. She knocked back, twice, and the knocking stopped completely. She didn't sleep after that. She sat with her back against the wall until the sun came up. The next morning, on her hands and knees, she examined the floor inch by inch. That's when she saw the carvings. Small marks scratched into the underside of the baseboard along the east wall. Not random, not damage, deliberate. Symbols, numbers, and one line, scratched deep enough to read clearly, that said, "Third panel from the east wall." Lena went to the truck, got a flathead screwdriver, came back inside, counted the floor panels from the east wall. 1, 2, 3. She wedged the screwdriver into the seam and pried. The board groaned, bent, then popped free with a crack that echoed through the empty trailer. Beneath it was a metal hatch, not original to the trailer. Someone had cut a square hole in the subfloor, welded a steel plate with a recessed handle, and sealed the edges with caulk that had long since dried and cracked apart. Lena grabbed the handle and pulled. Inside was a military-style waterproof container, olive green, latched on both sides, heavy. She unlatched it and opened the lid. Cash, stacks of it, banded with rubber bands, not bank straps. She counted it later, $87,000. Below the cash were documents, contracts, bank statements, wire transfer receipts, inspection reports with forged signatures, and photographs, dozens of them, men in hard hats, men in suits at groundbreaking ceremonies, and one photograph that made Lena's hands stop moving. It was Marcus, her husband, standing beside a man whose face she recognized from a banner she'd seen that very morning, hanging from the front of the Harlan courthouse. The banner said, "Re-elect Dale Kinney, building our future." Dale Kinney, county commissioner, owner of Kinney Development, the most respected man in Harlan. The same company Marcus had worked for, the same company that offered Lena $1,200 to go away quietly. Lena spread the documents out across the floor around her. She sat cross-legged with the cash stacked beside her knee, the photographs in her lap, and the contracts fanned out like a hand of cards. And she understood. Marcus had been right. He'd found something real, and someone else had known it too. Someone had gathered this evidence, hidden it under the floor of a trailer at the edge of a town nobody cared about, and then disappeared. The trailer wasn't junk. It was a vault, and Lena had bought the key for $5. She closed the hatch, replaced the floorboard, pressed it flat with her palm until it sat flush. Then she dragged the lawn chair to the center of the room, sat down, and drank a glass of water from the garden hose. Slowly, the trailer was quiet. The desert outside was quiet. The baby kicked once, hard, and Lena put her hand on the spot and held it there. She almost smiled. For the first time in weeks, the weight on her chest had shifted. Not gone, but shifted. She thought, maybe the worst part is behind me. Maybe now I just need to figure out what to do with what I've found. She sat there for a while, breathing, thinking. The light came through the plastic window sheets in soft, milky squares. Nothing moved. Nobody knocked. Then someone knocked on the door. Not under the floor. On the door. Lena opened it. A man stood on the cinder block that served as a front step. Tall, clean-shaven, pressed button-down shirt tucked into dark jeans. Boots that had never touched mud or a worksite. Behind him, a black truck idled in the dirt road with the windows up and the engine running. He smiled. It was the kind of smile that had been rehearsed in mirrors. Controlled. Professional. He said his name was Ray Kinney, Dale Kinney's son. He said he'd heard she'd purchased the trailer and he wanted to make her an offer. $500. Cash. Right now. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out an envelope. Held it out. Lena looked at the envelope. She looked at Ray. She said no. She said she'd just moved in. Ray nodded, still smiling. He put the envelope away. He said, "I completely understand. But this trailer's been a problem for the county for years. Structural issues, zoning issues. My father's office would really appreciate it if we could resolve the situation." Lena asked what situation he was talking about. Something changed in Ray's eyes then. The smile stayed, but the warmth behind it left. Like someone had flipped a switch. He said, "The situation of a person living in a condemned structure on a disputed lot is a liability, Mrs. Hart. For you and for the county." Lena caught it immediately. She said, "How do you know my name?" Ray paused. Just a beat. Just long enough for the silence to mean something. Then he said, "Small town." He turned around and walked back to his truck. Got in. Pulled away. But Lena watched him, and she noticed two things. First, he didn't drive toward town. He drove toward the courthouse. Second, he pulled out a phone before he'd gone 50 yards. That night, Lena moved the container from under the floor to the cab of her truck. She covered it with the tarp and the duffel bag and locked the doors. Then she went back inside the trailer and sat in the lawn chair with the screwdriver in her hand and listened to every sound the desert made. Coyotes. Wind. The trailer frame ticking as the temperature dropped. She didn't sleep. Not 1 minute. She sat there until the sky turned gray, then pink, then bright. The next morning, two things happened before 9 o'clock. First, a notice appeared taped to her trailer door. From the County Code Enforcement Office. It declared the structure uninhabitable and gave her 72 hours to vacate. The signature at the bottom was Dale Kinney's. Second, she walked around the truck and found the rear tire on the driver's side slashed clean through. Not a puncture. A cut. Long and deliberate and deep. Lena stood there looking at the flat tire with the code enforcement notice in her hand, and she made a decision. She wasn't going to run. She wasn't going to hide. She wasn't going to call a lawyer she couldn't afford or a police department that had already failed her once. She was going to walk into town. And she was going to do the one thing that nobody with this kind of evidence is supposed to do. She was going to make it public. If you're still with me, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Because what Lena did next is something nobody in Harlan saw coming. She put on the only clean shirt she had left. She pulled her hair back. She took the folder of documents, the photographs, the bank records, the contracts, and she walked 1.5 miles into town on a road with no sidewalk in morning heat that was already over 90 degrees. 8 months pregnant. Carrying proof that the most powerful man in the county was a fraud, a thief, and possibly a murderer. She walked into Patty's diner at 8:15 in the morning. The breakfast crowd was already in. 12 people. Farmers. Retirees. The woman from the auction who'd called the trailer a coffin. 2 men in county work shirts. Patty behind the counter with a pot of coffee. Lena sat down at the counter. She ordered a cup of coffee. Patty poured it without a word. Lena took 1 sip. Then she opened the folder. She didn't make a speech. She didn't raise her voice. She just started laying photographs on the counter. One by one. Slowly. Like dealing cards. Dale Kinney shaking hands with a state building inspector named Harding, who had signed off on 14 structures that later failed code review. Dale Kinney's signature on wire transfer orders routed through 3 shell companies based in Reno. A spreadsheet showing payments to county officials listed under consulting fees. Dale Kinney standing beside Marcus Hart on a job site 2 weeks before Marcus fell 32 feet to his death. Believe me, that diner went dead silent. The clatter of forks stopped. The coffee pot stopped pouring. Every head turned. The woman from the auction was 3 stools down. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Nothing came out. Patty came around from behind the counter and picked up one of the photographs and held it close to her face. She studied it for a long time. Then she set it down gently, like it was something fragile, like it might break. Someone at a back table said, "Where did you get these?" Lena didn't turn around. She said, "From the trailer you all laughed at." Then she picked up the folder, left $1 beside the coffee cup, and walked out. Within 4 hours, someone made a phone call to the Nevada State Attorney General's office. It wasn't anyone from Harlan. It was a man who'd been passing through that morning, stopped at Patty's for breakfast, and happened to have a brother-in-law who worked in state law enforcement. By that evening, 2 investigators from the State Fraud Division were driving toward Harlan in an unmarked car. Dale Kinney found out before they arrived. Of course he did. He had people everywhere. By the time the investigators reached the courthouse, Dale was already there with his attorney. Calm, cooperative, offering coffee and access to whatever records they wanted to see. That's how men like Dale Kinney operate. They don't panic. They manage. They control the tempo. But while Dale was managing the investigators, Ray Kinney drove to the trailer lot. Lena saw the black truck coming from a quarter-mile away. The dust trail behind it rose like a signal. This time there was no envelope, no smile, no rehearsed friendliness. Ray got out of the truck and walked toward her fast, his boots crunching gravel. He stopped 6 feet from the trailer door. Lena was standing in the doorway. He said, "You have no idea what you've done." Lena said nothing. She let him talk. He said, "Those documents are stolen property. You're in possession of stolen evidence. That makes you a criminal." Lena looked at him. Steady. She said, "Your father's company killed my husband. I know exactly what I've done." Ray stood there. The wind blew dust between them. He looked at her the way you look at something you've underestimated badly. He said, "You should have taken the 500. Lena said, "You should have offered it to someone who had something to lose." Ray got back in his truck. He left, but he didn't go quietly. That night, just past 2 in the morning, Lena heard footsteps outside the trailer. Slow, deliberate, moving along the south wall. Then a scraping sound at the window. Metal on the window frame. Someone was trying to pry the plastic sheeting off. Trying to get in. Lena grabbed her flashlight. She crept to the window, flicked it on. A face appeared in the light for half a second. Male. Unfamiliar. Then gone. She heard boots on gravel. Running. An engine starting. Tires spinning on the dirt road. Then nothing. She sat with her back against the wall for the rest of the night. One hand on her belly. One hand on the screwdriver. Her heart pounding so hard the baby kicked back against it. But she did not leave. She was done leaving. The state investigators came to the trailer the next day. There were 2 of them. One was a man named Chun who took notes on a yellow legal pad and didn't talk much. The other was a woman named Ruiz who did most of the talking and had eyes that didn't miss anything. Lena gave them everything. The cash, the contracts, the photographs, the transfer records. She held nothing back. She told them about Marcus, about the scaffold, about the foreman, Garrett Boone, who told Marcus to keep his mouth shut, about the detective in Reno who said no paperwork was found at the site, about Ray Kinney's visits, about the code enforcement notice, about the slashed tire, about the face at the window. Ruiz listened to all of it. Then she looked at the documents for a long time. She picked up the photograph of Marcus and Dale Kinney and studied it the way a doctor studies an X-ray. Then she said, "Mrs. Hart, do you understand what you found here?" Lena said she had a pretty good idea. Ruiz told her. The documents linked Kinney Development to fraudulent billing on at least 9 public construction contracts, bribery of 2 county inspectors, falsified safety reports on multiple job sites, and a pattern of unsafe construction practices that had directly resulted in 3 workplace fatalities over a 10-year period. One of those fatalities was Marcus Hart. Lena sat there. She didn't cry. Not in front of them. She just nodded. She said, "What happens now?" Ruiz said, "Now we do our job." The investigation moved fast after that. Faster than anyone expected. Once the state got involved, the wall that Dale Kinney had built around himself for 30 years started to crack. And once it cracked, it crumbled. The foreman, Garrett Boone, was the first to break. Investigators pulled him in for questioning on a Wednesday afternoon. He held out for about 2 hours. Then they showed him the documents from the trailer, and he went pale and asked for a deal. He told them everything. Marcus Hart had found the records. He'd made copies on a job site printer after hours. He'd given those copies to a coworker he trusted, a man named Eddie Salazar. Eddie was supposed to take the copies to the authorities. Eddie got scared. He'd heard stories about people who crossed Dale Kinney. A contractor in Fernley who'd filed a complaint and then lost his business within a year. A county clerk who'd asked too many questions and found herself transferred to a dead end posting 200 miles away. Eddie decided the safest thing to do was hide the evidence and disappear. He lived in a single-wide trailer on a dirt lot at the edge of Harlan. One night, he cut a hole in the subfloor, bolted in a steel hatch, packed the documents and the cash into a waterproof container, sealed it up, and scratched directions into the baseboard. Then he loaded his car and drove away and never came back. That trailer sat untouched for 6 years. The county seized it for unpaid lot fees, and Lena Hart bought it for $5 at a Saturday auction while the whole town laughed. Dale Kinney was arrested on a Thursday morning at his home. The charges included 9 counts of contract fraud, 4 counts of bribery, 2 counts of evidence tampering, and 3 counts of involuntary manslaughter. Ray Kinney was charged as an accessory to fraud and obstruction of justice. The trial took 8 months. Lena was called to testify. She flew back to Nevada twice. She sat in a witness box for 2 full days and answered every question in the same steady voice she'd used the day she laid photographs on Patty's counter. She carried her daughter into the courtroom on the second day. The baby had been born 3 weeks after the night someone tried to break into the trailer. Lena named her Mara, after Marcus. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They convicted Dale Kinney on all counts. He was sentenced to 23 years. Ray Kinney received 7. Garrett Boone, in exchange for his testimony, received 3 years of probation and a fine. The state of Nevada launched a full audit of every contract Kinney Development had ever held. 14 additional violations were found. 2 other companies connected to Kinney's network were investigated and fined. The county inspector who had signed off on the false safety reports lost his license and was charged separately. Lena received a settlement from the liquidation of Kinney Development assets. She didn't ask for it. The State Fraud Division recommended it as restitution. It was enough to start over. More than enough. She used part of it to buy a small house in Harlan. Not on the edge of town. Not hidden behind a dirt lot. A real house on a real street with a foundation and a roof that didn't leak and a door that locked from the inside. The rest she put into a trust for Mara. People in Harlan don't talk about the trailer much anymore. The lot sits empty. The cinder blocks are still there, sinking slowly into the dirt the way everything sinks in the desert eventually. The plastic sheeting blew off the windows months ago. The frame is rusting through. In a few more years it'll collapse entirely, and the desert will take it back the way the desert takes everything back. But people talk about Lena, not the way they talked about her when she first arrived. Not with laughter, not with pity. Not with the particular cruelty that small towns reserve for people they don't understand. They talk about her with something quieter, something that doesn't have a clean word. Respect is close, but it's not quite right. It's more like recognition, like they're seeing her clearly for the first time. The woman from the auction, the one who called the trailer a coffin on wheels, she showed up at Lena's house one afternoon about a year after the trial. She brought a casserole in a glass dish covered in foil and an apology she'd been rehearsing in her head for months. Lena opened the door and looked at her and let her in without a word. They sat at the kitchen table. The casserole sat between them, still warm. The woman said, "I'm sorry I laughed." Lena said, "You weren't the only one." That was it. They sat there for a while longer, talked a little, about the heat, about Mara, about nothing important. Then the woman left, and Lena washed the dish and put it in the cabinet and went on with her day. Lena drives past the lot sometimes. Not on purpose. It's just on the way to the grocery store. She doesn't slow down. She doesn't stop. She doesn't look at the rusting frame and feel anything dramatic. There's no surge of triumph. No wave of sadness. It's just a lot. A piece of dirt with some metal on it. Everything that was hidden has been found. Everything that was buried has been brought up into the light. Mara sits in the car seat behind her, babbling at the window the way babies do, reaching for the sunlight that comes through the glass in long bright slashes. Lena keeps her eyes on the road. She doesn't look back. She learned something in that trailer, but it wasn't in the documents. It wasn't in the money. It was in the floor itself, in the way it sagged and groaned and bent under every step she took, but held. It held. Just barely. Just long enough. Long enough for her to find what someone had hidden. long enough for her to stand up and carry it into the daylight. Sometimes that's all you need. Not a solid foundation, not a guarantee that everything will be fine. Just something beneath your feet that holds long enough for you to do what you came to do. And then you build from there.